Russia's winter campaign has again become a central element of its military strategy, as the Kremlin authorized large-scale strikes on Ukraine's energy system at the end of January and in the first week of February. According to Ukrainian officials, these attacks involved more than 40 missiles and nearly 400 drones targeting high-voltage lines and transformer stations across the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky and Energy Minister Herman Shmyhal warned repeatedly of mounting risks to the national grid, as Russian commanders monitored shutdowns of thermal power plants in western Ukraine. The Russian objective, as described by Ukrainian authorities, was to freeze Ukrainian cities, halt industry, and plunge Kyiv into darkness. Strikes continued through the night of 12 to 13 February, with ballistic Iskander and S-300 missiles hitting civilian infrastructure from Dnipro to Odessa. Ukrainian officials framed these actions as an attempt to leave the population defenseless during the coldest period of winter. But the situation shifted dramatically as the repercussions of the conflict reached well inside Russian territory itself. The region of Belgorod, a key logistical hub near the border, became the focus of an unexpected crisis when severe winter conditions and targeted Ukrainian strikes combined to produce a large-scale energy collapse. Between 13 and 15 February, Ukrainian forces carried out what they described as a precision counterstrike on critical energy facilities in Belgorod, including the Luch thermal power plant, which serves as the main source of electricity and heating for the city. Footage circulating on Russian and Ukrainian channels showed missile impacts on the plant's turbine halls and main transformer stations. Local reports indicated that the resulting explosions caused an immediate blackout across central Belgorod, shutting down lighting, hospitals, apartment blocks, and industrial sites. Russian air defenses, which were intended to shield the region, reportedly malfunctioned in several areas. Local media stated that some air defense missiles struck civilian buildings, deepening the crisis already triggered by the power plant shutdown. A chain reaction in the electrical grid followed, leaving more than 220,000 subscribers without power in the wider Belgorod region. Authorities estimated that, counting family members, roughly 600,000 people were affected by the outage amid sub-zero temperatures. Officials acknowledged that Russia was now experiencing the same scenario it had attempted to impose on Ukraine. Regional Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov publicly confirmed the scale of the damage on 14th and 15th February, stating that destruction at the Luch thermal plant was severe and that heating and hot water supplies could not be restored before the end of April. His statements contradicted earlier messaging from Moscow that had described the impact as minor. Gladkov further disclosed that authorities had ordered the draining of water from heating systems in 455 residential buildings to prevent pipes from freezing and bursting, a measure that signaled a near-total failure of the city's heating network. In central Belgorod alone, between 84,000 and 100,000 residents lost heat, while the entire city remained without hot water. With electricity also disrupted, an estimated 100,000 residents faced shortages of running water as pumps stopped functioning. Residents turned to collecting snow or lining up at water trucks deployed across the city. Large apartment complexes and hundreds of individual buildings remained without basic utilities as temperatures remained below freezing. The regional administration advised families to send children to other regions temporarily, an admission that the state was unable to ensure safe living conditions during the winter. Subscribe for continuing coverage and detailed analysis in our upcoming reports. The escalation inside Russia continued to unfold as regional officials across Belgorod, Kursk, Bryansk, and Voronezh reported mounting disruptions linked to Ukrainian strikes and to grid instability spreading across the western border regions. In Belgorod, the collapse of the Luch thermal plant triggered sustained outages that cut electricity, heating, and hot water for hundreds of thousands of residents. Local authorities confirmed that more than 45 major apartment complexes and numerous standalone buildings were affected by the failure of water pumping systems, leaving entire districts without running water. Reports from the region described residents collecting snow for basic needs and standing in long lines near water trucks dispatched to mitigate shortages. Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov's public remarks drew widespread attention as his statements contrasted sharply with the Kremlin's efforts to downplay the severity of the situation. On 14th and 15th February, in successive briefings, he acknowledged that the damage to the Luch plant was irreparable in the short term, and that full restoration of heating and hot water could not be expected before late April. He also confirmed that authorities had ordered the evacuation of water from heating systems in 455 residential buildings to prevent pipe bursts caused by sub-zero temperatures. Local officials noted that if the water were left in the system, it would freeze and cause structural damage across entire housing blocks, reinforcing that the city's energy infrastructure had effectively failed. The consequences of the shutdown quickly extended beyond residential areas. Belgorod, a major agricultural and industrial center, suffered widespread operational halts as factories and processing plants dependent on the Luch plant's output shut down. Regional administrations reported that numerous small and medium-sized enterprises had suspended work, with employees placed on unpaid leave until the restoration of power. Economists in Russia had previously warned of a growing category of inactive workers, formally employed but effectively without work, and the Belgorod blackout was cited as a factor likely to accelerate this trend. In neighboring Kursk, Governor Alexander Kinstein announced that Ukrainian drone strikes had damaged power lines between 10 and 15 February, prompting authorities to introduce rolling blackouts. Officials stated that outages could occur unpredictably as the grid struggled to maintain stability. In Bryansk, a separate wave of more than 120 drone strikes between 13th and 15th February caused serious damage to transformer stations. Governor Alexander Bogomaz referred to outages as brief, but local sources reported multi-day disruptions to water and heating systems in some towns. Voronezh authorities likewise cited repeated attacks in late January and early February, describing a pattern of vulnerabilities in the regional energy infrastructure. Security concerns also increased inside Russia. On February 9th, a communication tower in Belgorod caught fire in what officials described as an act of sabotage, attributed by some Russian media outlets to partisan groups. Local security services acknowledged that such incidents had contributed to broader instability, adding to the pressures already created by Ukrainian strikes on energy facilities. Analysts noted that these developments underscored a shift in the conflict, with the impact of military operations reaching far beyond the front line and into essential infrastructure deep within Russian territory. As the outages persisted, Russian citizens in the affected regions confronted sustained shortages and deteriorating living conditions. Residents of Belgorod described homes turning into refrigerated spaces due to the prolonged loss of heating. Electrical heaters remained unusable during power cuts, and food stored in refrigerators had to be moved outdoors to prevent spoilage. Regional emergency services continued to distribute water, while municipal authorities struggled to maintain minimal support for vulnerable populations. Officials warned that the situation would remain critical until temperatures rose in spring or until replacement equipment could be sourced to rehabilitate damaged power facilities. Subscribe to stay updated as our coverage continues. The humanitarian, economic, and political consequences of the Belgorod blackout continued to unfold as local and federal authorities acknowledged the scale of the disruption and the limits of their ability to respond. Analysts noted that the prolonged outage exposed systemic fragilities in Russia's civil infrastructure, including dependence on foreign-made components and the diversion of engineering resources toward military production. The Luch thermal power plant, which relied on turbines and control systems formerly supplied by Western manufacturers, could not be repaired promptly due to sanctions and shortages of qualified technicians. Regional officials indicated that replacement parts might have to be sourced from China or the black market, contributing to the extended repair timeline into late April. The crisis also triggered visible economic strain. Belgorod's industrial and agricultural sectors, identified as key contributors to regional output, faced partial shutdowns as production lines dependent on continuous electricity were halted. Local businesses reported difficulties maintaining operations and paying workers, with many employees placed on unpaid leave. Economists observed that the blackout would add thousands of workers to the category of inactive employees, a figure the Russian Ministry of Labor had previously placed at 254,000 nationwide. The outages were expected to tighten household budgets further in regions already affected by rising inflation and reduced consumer purchasing power. Food security concerns also emerged as energy disruptions affected greenhouse complexes, poultry farms, and dairy processing facilities in the region. Sector analysts warned that falling output would push prices higher. Data referenced by Ukrainian strategic communication sources indicated declines in Russian consumption of staples such as milk and rice, with the Belgorod outage expected to intensify these trends. Local residents reported shortages in stores and increased pressure on community support services as families sought alternative sources of food and water. Beyond Belgorod, neighboring regions experienced mounting uncertainty. Kursk officials introduced rolling blackouts to stabilize the grid after drone strikes damaged key transmission lines. In Bryansk, local communities described ongoing difficulties with heating and water supply after drone strikes heavily damaged transformer stations in mid-February. Voronezh authorities also acknowledged that attacks earlier in the winter highlighted structural vulnerabilities in regional energy systems. Security services reported heightened risks of sabotage inside Russia, citing the 9th of February fire at a communication tower in Belgorod as evidence of increased domestic instability. Politically, the crisis intensified scrutiny of federal responses and emergency planning. While state media referred to the situation as a temporary technical malfunction, regional leaders such as Governor Gladkov were compelled to publicly address the scale of the outages. His recommendation for families to send children to other regions and his admission that heating could not be restored before late April underscored the severity of the crisis. Observers noted that these statements contrasted with the Kremlin's messaging and signaled deepening tensions between federal narratives and regional realities. Residents across Belgorod continued to document the impact of the prolonged outage, describing homes without heat, limited access to water, and growing uncertainty about future services. Relief efforts focused on providing water distribution, temporary shelter, and emergency heating support, but local officials warned that capacity remained limited. As temperatures remained below freezing, families faced extended periods without sufficient heating, prompting concern among humanitarian groups and municipal authorities. The situation highlighted broader implications for Russia's civilian infrastructure during wartime. The combination of energy system vulnerabilities, sanctions-driven shortages, and prolonged military demands created conditions in which critical facilities could not be repaired quickly. Industrial disruptions, rising unemployment, and the strain on local administrative resources pointed to long-term challenges for affected regions. Analysts concluded that the Belgorod blackout demonstrated the direct impact of the conflict on Russian civilians and the growing difficulty of maintaining essential services in border areas exposed to